In 2015, Canada and 192 member states of the United Nations adopted 17 ambitious goals for the world to achieve by 2030. These goals, known as the Sustainable Development Goals or the SDGs, were the result of the world's largest stakeholder dialogue, formed in collaboration and consultation with civil society, government, academia, and businesses. The goals represent everything from decent work and economic growth to good health and well-being, gender equality, climate action, reduced inequalities, as well as sustainable cities and communities. Many leading companies are recognizing both the risks and the opportunities the issues within these goals represent. Those companies see the SDGs as a comprehensive framework that highlights the social and economic development needs of a greater society, and as a result reflect stakeholder expectations, reveal future policy direction, and help the company identify current and future risks. By mapping business operations to the SDGs, companies can better understand where they are both contributing positively and negatively to the achievement of the goals. The goals can also help to identify risks in the value chain that directly or indirectly will impact the business ability to operate and to grow. Those who fail to identify risk and contribute positively to the goals could be exposed both to reputational risk and growing regulatory risk. And as some are saying, missing out on a huge opportunity. The goals can also be used as a lens to translate global needs into business opportunities. According to the Business and Sustainable Development Commission, the SDGs could be worth at least $12 trillion in market opportunities by 2030. But that's for those who understand how to look at the SDGs as an opportunity for innovation and understand where the gaps are and how to fill them. Further, the SDGs framework can be seen as a global language, one that is spoken by governments, by organizations, your shareholders, your stakeholders. As an overarching framework, the SDGs can help companies effectively communicate and report their strategies and their purpose and become part of a bigger global dialogue. If properly executed and done with integrity, embedding SDGs into strategy will help companies gain a positive license to operate and to grow. But as we grow closer to 2030, inequalities continue to rise, water shortages and pollution remain, and we continue to experience the growing dangers of climate change. Therefore, the 2030 agenda has become more critical than ever, and leadership and courage in this space is increasingly critical. Business as usual is no longer an option. Senior leadership and boards therefore need to be able to understand, articulate, and act upon the 2030 agenda in order to ensure the resiliency and prosperity of their companies. And that is why competent boards, with the support of the SDG unit of the Canadian government, has interviewed Canadian leaders to better understand how companies, how board of directors and executives are demonstrating leadership in the SDGs, and how businesses and the government can support the achievement of the goals, provide education, and encourage more leaders in the private sector to take part, contribute, and benefit from the 2030 agenda. To do this, we have conducted over 30 interviews in 6 different cities in order to share insight and advice on the advancement of the SDGs. As you will see, we have interviewed a wide representation of Canadian leaders. And in this video, we have compiled clips from the many interviews to bring first-hand views on the value of the SDGs for businesses and for Canada. What we frequently heard was that reaching the goals requires leadership from board of directors, investors, well, from all parts of society and from all sectors, and that Canada should be seen as a leader in the SDGs. Showcasing SDG leadership can attract investment and talent, both domestically and abroad, and drive an innovative growth strategy for Canada. However, To achieve that, there is a need for awareness and education for all levels of businesses and wider society, as well as policies and that incentivize and encourage sustainable behavior, including that government lead, for example, through their procurement requirements. And now I will turn it over to our Canadian leaders so you can hear their insights and views.
First of all, they need to recognize that this is a huge business opportunity for businesses throughout the world, but in particular in Canada, because the SDGs is all about what Canada is already a champion of. It's about infrastructure, it's about education, it's about healthcare, it's about the rule of law, all things that actually Canada is recognized, Canada and Canadians are recognized as a global champion. So this is a huge business opportunity, and it is everybody has a responsibility. We're all on the same ship called Planet Earth. It's all the same cruise ship, and we ought to be actually working together to avoid some of the icebergs that are there. Notre lutte contre les inégalités économiques et sociales au Canada et dans le monde exige que le secteur privé y contribue largement aux solutions. Il faut aligner beaucoup mieux qu'il ne l'est actuellement le capital avec le développement durable.
Well, I think for the investors, now data already shows that investing in a sustainable product or in a sustainable initiative, and there's even metadata now that shows that, is, if not at least as good as a regular product or initiative, it's actually performing better. And, we talked about competitive advantage earlier. I think slowly but very surely, investors will see that that there's going to be more and more demand, more and more ask for sustainable products initiatives, and that it will be really valuable to invest in. I love that sentence: create value with values, and I think the proof is in the pudding. The more they will see that this is actually really that there is no contradiction between investing in a sustainable product and ROI. In the contrary, probably. Then you will see more and more and more coming.
For Unilever, the SDGs represent a very informed and careful framework for how we see the long-term future of not only our business, but the intersection of our business with all of the communities with which we interact. And I think it's very important for us to be taking a long-term view, first of all, because short-term capital decisions are not in our best interest. So a long-term view needs to be taken, and the SDGs are all about long-term thinking. But more importantly, to be able to take a long-term view on very, very critical issues that are important to us as a business and as advocates. Gender equality, social justice, climate change, the health of the planet, the health of the people who we want as consumers in all of the communities that we work with. So it's a framework, it's a long-term framework, and it's one that has identified, I think very capably, the very critical issues that we're confronting as a business.
If you want to see the next great business opportunities, I hate to phrase it this way, but it's true. Look at climate change issues. Look at global poverty. Look at forced migration and migration generally. How do we feed a world that's growing at the pace that it is? These fundamental SDG questions are the world's greatest business questions.
Should companies report on their progress for the Sustainable Development Goals? I think companies that don't start reporting, communicating how their strategy connects to the Sustainable Development Goals, mapping their initiatives and efforts to the indicators to make that connection to how we're progressing on the SDGs. Companies that don't start now might find themselves behind as we see an increasing trend of not only focus on the SDGs, but investment flowing into companies focused on the SDGs.
So the short answer is yes, companies should be reporting on the SDGs, but let me give a little context to that. So it's important how they report. You want to report that goes to the board of directors. You want to have accountability there at the highest level so that you're more confident, there's no guarantees in life, but you're more confident that these issues are seen and vetted by the directors, that they're thinking about these things, and that there's an impetus, a sort of authority to make sure that they're woven throughout the operations of the company as well.
Just earlier this year, where an actual question was asked at one of our stock shareholder meetings about CO2. What is LafargeHolcim doing about CO2, which you never would have heard of before, and that raises the awareness around our board, raises it amongst our shareholders, which is, in wearing my hat, fantastic. I mean, this is the kind of attention that we need. And you think, they've been making cement for generations, thousands of years, and from a LafargeHolcim perspective, this is the first time. It just shows that now more than ever is why we need to focus on what we're doing for these SDGs.
The fantastic thing about integrating reporting is that sustainability now sits alongside financial disclosures. And we have targets in there, we have sustainability targets. So if we want to be setting the right targets, then we needed sort of some kind of framework to do that. The UN SDGs are brilliant in that sense because a lot of reporting is always backwards, but this is the piece that's actually forward-looking. So it really informs your strategy. And the other great thing about the SDGs is, for us, is that these are the problems we face as a globe, and it's a fantastic tool for us to kind of look at our company and look at what the problems, what's going to impact us, and align our strategies with that. So it's helping to inform future strategy for the company.
We are part of one ecosystem, and we need to start thinking beyond what I said before, the quarterly analyst report or the 4-year investment cycle. We are making decisions for many decades. If you are a corporate board, you need to define what are the pain points on environment and innovation, on environment and climate change, I should say. What are the innovation needs of this industry? Translate these in measurable targets and then hold people accountable. And so we absolutely need strong environmental and climate change targets, because I always say measuring is knowing. And if you don't have the targets, you're going to end up somewhere where you don't want to be in the first place.
Companies of a certain size that are operating in Canada should have to disclose the percent of their revenues that are derived from sustainable development solutions. Just in that act alone, we'd have to get our act together on what qualifies, and there'd be some chairs moving, but if it's a priority, we can figure that out pretty quickly. And then people, when you're measuring it, it gets managed, and then people want to be leading and optimizing, and then they start to realize, like, whoa, our solutions book is growing faster than our problems book, and that's what's happening globally.
Well, I think reporting is a very important aspect of progress. Transparency, we're in a hyper-transparent world. You have to have the courage to be able to report about what you're doing, not just good but also your weaknesses. For investors, they're causing reporting to be virtually mandatory. So while some governments have declared it as mandatory, I think for any publicly traded companies, it's become that de facto by the fact investors require it. And collaborations of investors also, like the Climate Disclosure Project. But we have had a problem or a barrier with common language. I think the different architectures that can be applied to reporting have been confusing often. And so companies end up having to map to multiple different architectures. That is problematic. So the more we can cause alignment to a more common architecture, the better.
I'm a pretty firm believer that if you're not public about it and then you're not sharing your progress, it's probably not going to happen. And so I would also continue to encourage shareholders, particularly the larger shareholders, the pension funds of the world, to continue to put pressure on companies to be more public about their goals. Because once they are public, then they will get reported on. And if they're not reported on, they will not be met.
Absolutely. I think that being a leader means being transparent, being accountable, and allowing your progress and best practices to be shared so that others can either leverage what you've experienced or challenges or successes, and they can implement. So being a leader is not just doing. Being a leader is making sure that you're able to share so that others can duplicate or grow, and with their growth, we also will learn. So I think it's incredibly important that we remain accountable and report our successes and our failures.
I have a view of board of directors that actually is one of stewardship. And it is the board of directors that really has the responsibility to question and, in fact, provide advice on future directions. And those are largely questions around risk and opportunity. The nature of boards of directors have really changed in the last 2 decades at least. We see that both internationally and domestically. I think one of the interesting things that we're now seeing is the coming together globally of guidelines, if you like, or peer pressure, however you'd like to put it, about what is appropriate, and just some learning.
I think that the board, clearly it ultimately has oversight over the senior executive team. And I think that as businesses are more and more looking to signals like, or frameworks like the SDGs, boards are starting to ask those really big fundamental questions around what is the purpose of their companies, what ways can companies really fulfill their obligations to stakeholders, and then providing oversight around ESG issues and looking to external signals like the SDGs to be thinking about the potential that companies have. I think we have a long way to go in Canada to truly having diverse boards that are going to best serve our economy. I think that our boardrooms are full of excellent people, but still Canadian boards are not diverse enough.
What I think is important is that increasingly boards are being asked with management to identify what their noble purpose is. What is their purpose other than earning a profit? And I think that increasingly in the boards that I'm on, we're seeing this stressed. It's purpose and profit. It's not one at the expense of the other. And frequently that statement of purpose entails one or more of what can be found in the Sustainable Development Goals. The other thing that I would say is that increasingly we see in the major investors that they have, I'm thinking here of institutional investors, who increasingly have people with ESG in their titles. And so it's more and more a focus of investors as to, where is a corporation on achieving its purpose? Does it have a purpose that's consistent with social, environmental, and good governance objectives? And is it therefore worthy of support and investment?
I think the first thing for a board to do probably is to educate itself about the SDGs. What are the Sustainable Development Goals? What do they mean for the part of the world that we live in and the businesses that we're involved with?
I think, for any board of directors that thinks that these things aren't important, they're putting themselves in, future financial risk, economic risk, competitiveness risk, risk of consumer backlash, risk of losing their social license. I mean, there's many, many good business reasons why you want to be taking these SDGs or broader social and environmental goals seriously as a director?
I think directors need to ask the right questions. They need to ask their advisors. They need to challenge their advisors on how the SDG goals fit within the mandate of their goals as a company, and challenge them to present innovative, excellent ideas on how to participate in a meaningful way with these broader goals.
I think today, board members right across the country are looking for solutions or education, or where can they get that information to be more responsible on whichever boards that they are currently sitting on, so that they're aware of the risk and they can manage that risk accordingly and make sure that they're doing their part to help the company move forward in this new reality, new future economy.
What are its risks if these sustainable development goals are not achieved? Then I also ask, what are the opportunities to the business in helping to achieve the sustainable development goals? And I think that those are questions that boards and executives should ask and answer regarding the SDGs. So the SDGs is risk and opportunity, and if they're dealt with that way, if there are risks in them not being achieved, or their opportunities, then they would make their way into the corporate strategy.
Fundamentally, corporate board's role is one of fiduciary oversight of ensuring the well-being of that corporate entity. Now, I believe that the well-being of that corporate entity in the future will also be tied to the well-being of the community in which it's located. So if you're being prudent and taking a medium to long-term thought on that corporate entity, then you do want to be highly aware of the SDGs. You want to be aware of the challenges that the world is facing.
The board's role is actually it needs to be elevating the discussion. It needs to be embedding some of those considerations as part of the strategic priorities. It needs to be thoughtful and really encourage the CEO and the leadership team to be thinking about the consequences of its actions, direct and indirect, positive and negative, short and long term, so that the organization or corporation actually does survive, does thrive over the long term, and it can in fact demonstrate with its actions, with its performance, with measurement, that it is truly having a positive financial and societal or environmental benefit over the long term.
Every board member of every company and every leadership team of every company should look at what it can do to actually just make sure that they see the opportunity, but that they also see the risk of not acting. There's a cost in not doing anything. There's a risk in not doing anything. And this is what the private sector and those who control capital in our society needs to come to grip with. Look at the risk and look at the opportunities. And make sure that we push ourselves to look at things a little bit differently. Because if we continue to look at things the same way we've been doing for the last 70 years, we know what it means. It means actually that the planet will be unsustainable.
If people in prominent positions in those organizations, well-known leaders in the business community, start to take this kind of thing on board, then other people are going to perhaps wake up and go, oh, other businesses are talking about this. So we've moved, we're not talking anymore about the tree huggers and the rebels and the radicals. We're talking mainstream.
I think really setting a climate where, it's expected that organizations are helping Canada meet their commitments, right? And I think helping them where I think they're already doing well, for example, with gender equality and climate change and decent work and economic growth and reduced inequalities is where, there's 4 SDGs where I think the government's focused just through their general policies, right? But then it's also helping, working with governments to see what business opportunities can be created to help them in areas where I think that they may be able to do a better job. For example, I'm thinking of Indigenous communities. When you're thinking about no poverty and good health and well-being and quality education. We're talking about water, clean water, for example. So what can businesses do to assist government in addressing those SDGs at the same time is helping a population here in Canada that has some disadvantages.
It's a snowball effect, essentially, that we can demonstrate that the work that we're doing is doing good for the communities in which we're operating in, and that ultimately is driving some positive change and frankly, benefiting our organization in many ways. And then others hopefully see that and say, wow, we should do the same. We should get involved. And so we openly share our sustainability reports. We publish them and put them on our public website. And our hope, and I share those with everyone, including our competitors, because I actually want all others to do good and to aspire to do good within their respective organizations as well.
In order to create substantial progress on innovation, it does require an aligned approach between policymakers to get those signals right, between markets. And so, markets and things like carbon pricing can also create that incentive to adopt new technologies and processes. And you need talent. And so never underestimate the importance of having a really strong innovation ecosystem of entrepreneurs, idea creators that also are the magic of this. The vision is that you have to, all those things put together will create magic. I wouldn't say that you can point to exact analogs in places. Silicon Valley certainly is iconic for being seen as having that magic chemistry. Austin, Texas is another. Certainly for Alberta, we're attempting a major push into trying to create a more aligned and powerful innovation ecosystem. And it's a work in progress, but really positive signs.
I think the government could support the SDGs in their processes with the government contracts by asking those questions. Because as soon as you start asking questions, your vendors, your companies are going to pay attention, right? So I think absolutely the government could play a role around that. And I think they could play a role not just in their supply chain organizations, but also in the way in which they work with provinces in Canada around the various programs that they put in place, either with industry or government, provincial governments, or education. Because I think education has a role to play in this too. I go back to the three legs of the stool, and I think governments could be the way in which we coalesce around some of these SDGs. But I think it has to be a three-way partnership.
I would look to the government and or regulatory institutions at least to provide strong clarity on some of these issues. Because I think that's where most of the resistance remains. Is it really my duty? Is it really my job? And I think if we can get that clear on both the issuer side as well as the investors, then there's no choice but to move forward.
Using a common language of the SDGs to educate people that this is happening and this is a need that Canada has. Then, of course, having the local businesses creating the ecosystem that allows for the international or the foreign investment to take place. And you need to really have the government coming in and creating a good, let's say, framework. But I really stress framework. And keeping it very flexible that allows people to be creative, innovative, and not create so much limitation on how and if and when something can take place. Yeah? And speed, of course, is of the essence, because a lot of other countries are doing this already, and Canada now is in the mix, right? So do I make the investment in Canada or do I make it somewhere else? So that's the big question that is happening at the moment.
Certainly, as a collective Canada acting on the Sustainable Development Goals, I would say the one that we can really make a difference is on climate change. There's no doubt that there's a lot that we can do there as Canadians, whether it's looking at energy efficiency or looking at developing renewable energy, making investments in green buildings and new technologies and clean tech. So there's a lot that we can do there. I think on the education side, we have great institutions here, whether we make sure that the Sustainable Development Goal of higher education and good quality education is done here in Canada, we can also export that abroad. So Canadians can do a lot on education. I think also when it comes to water, Canadians are well known that we have a large freshwater resource, and we should be making sure that we're very good stewards of that resource and that gift, nature's gift that we have with water.
Well, I think we have to focus on, we can't sort of go to other parts of the world and say we want to ensure that you get clean drinking water and then leave parts of our own country without, with boil water advisories for the last 25 years. So we need to be able to show by example, and we can't be hypocrites about this stuff. If we're going to focus on gender equality or education opportunities for other countries, we should be showing by example. And that really goes to especially my experience with the Indigenous community in Canada.
Well, the great thing is the 17 are all interrelated. If we can, help solve equality, whether it's gender equality, whether it's male and female equality, well, that will help with issues like hunger, because more people can get educated, more people can get jobs, they can feed themselves. Through education, we can teach them about the importance of the environment, and that will be implemented to supporting, environmental objectives. So I think it's really important that we understand that you don't have to focus on all 17, but focusing on a few and understanding that your actions will impact the other 17 is very important.
I see the government of Canada almost like the mining industry. We don't talk about the good things that we do as much as we should. So perhaps, more roadshows by the government with Canadian enterprises or Canadian people that have, that can speak about the different topics or the things that Canada does. Advertising more, Canadian companies and supporting more Canadian companies in country.
I think a key strength of Canada is working as this team, getting governments and universities and businesses working together. And if I had a wish for Canada, it would be a role model of how to do sustainability as a team. I think that would be our biggest gift to the world.
What I think Canada, we have this timing, the pendulum has swung back towards this era of optimism. And I don't know many other countries that can ride the pendulum in that way now. So it could have been started somewhere else. It could have been led from somewhere else. But I think Canada's a prime candidate for really, embracing these concepts and these goals.
I think if Canada wants to remain competitive and be on the leadership, the forefront of innovation, then they should get on board with this, because otherwise we're being left behind. And it's not to say that we don't have that sort of comprehensive, coordinated, visible focus like we see in other places.
I'm positive that of all the places in the world that can achieve this, Canada is a country based on tolerance and some self-respect. But Canada is also going through its post-colonization phase and moving towards economic reconciliation with Indigenous people. And they have to look at the mirror as harshly as any other Canadians that have not paid attention to this, and that there's cause and effect. And right now people are really complaining about the negative effect, but they were the cause. So hopefully videos like this and other educational initiatives such as the work you're doing will change that.
There is worldwide support for the SDGs, and there's nothing really too radical about them either. These are very sound principles for a healthy economy, a healthy environment, and a healthy population. So I think being a leader in the SDGs is just makes sense on all levels. And certainly Canada should be a leader, should be striving to be a leader. I think already is, and this will be good for the economy.
What surprises me is that Canada seems to think that it needs permission to be a leader in this space. I don't understand that. We have the most multicultural society on the planet. We have some of the greatest array of resources that any nation could ever possibly wish to have, from fresh water to arable land to mineral resources to oil and gas and to renewable sources of power. We have an extraordinary abundance in this country. We don't need to ask permission to become leaders when it comes to long-term thinking, when it comes to social justice, when it comes to advancing arguments with respect to climate change and how it is that we're going to adapt and mitigate the impacts of climate change. We don't need to ask permission for that. What we need is people who are going to stand up and say, I want to participate in that discussion. And so we need to provide the right kind of incentive for those same people who want to do this to actually stand up and be counted.
Whether that's looking at how competitive we can be, or our regulatory framework and how that can be addressed to unleash the innovation that's required for the transformations in the SDGs. I think that's where Canada has a real opportunity to shine.
Well, I just think it's good for our economy. So Vancouver, we feel we're almost an island of green business. We have, for example, more than 30% of Canada's clean tech cluster is in Greater Vancouver. We're only 7% of the population. We're attracting all kinds of talent here that we think is because of our thriving green economy and obviously our how we take care of the environment here, both locally and right across the province. So it has all kinds of dividends, sometimes hard to measure, intangible, much more difficult to pinpoint it company by company, but as a ecosystem, a thriving business ecosystem, it's a winning formula.
So first off, I think sustainability is good for humanity. And I think what's good for humanity is good for business. So from a global scale, as we get better, I think it's good for people and that's good for business. And I think that goes for countries and I think it goes for companies. So I think companies that are good at this have an advantage, and I think countries that are good at this have an advantage. So absolutely, I think if it's a core strength, we should utilize it, and we should grow that core strength, both as countries and as companies, and as individuals.
Well, it's the Canada brand. Yeah, Canada has a great brand, and if we really are honest with ourselves, we of course always want to do more and better. But Canada is in a very good place as far as the SDGs compared to some of the other countries. Yeah, so I think we start already ahead. Now, how do we make the SDGs a part of our competitive advantage and part of something that we want to export?
Well, I think so, because a lot of the goals really speak to long-term success of your economy, both as a country and as the companies who make up your economy. And so if you're seen as a good place to put money because you're not into short-termism, if you can show that you've got superior returns because you're not covering the costs of the bad practices that don't accomplish the SDG objectives, then you're a good place to invest.
I didn't coin this, but we can either be buyers or sellers of the new economy, and I think we'd all rather be sellers. We have a culture of innovation here. We have incredible talent. We need to be nurturing that and pointing them in this direction such that, again, we can have an economy 5, 10, 20, 50 years from now that's thriving, as opposed to us simply, again, being consumers of solutions that are developed elsewhere.
There is nothing worse than having a poor reputation, either at home or internationally. And anything that a company does to enhance its reputation reduces the risk factor in the business decisions that they make. And when you know that the entire world has an agenda of sustainability, and that it's an agenda that is being perhaps driven by government in the first place, but really driven on a daily basis by other sectors, you want to be a part of it.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video.
To learn more about the work that the SDGs unit is doing to advance the SDGs within Canada, please visit Canada2030agenda.ca. And to learn more about the project and the work Competent Boards does to advance the SDGs and ESG within companies and their boardrooms, please visit us at competentboards.com.